Ian O'Connor, welcome to the Victory Degree Podcast.
Hey Nick, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Ian, let's cut straight to the chase. We're here to talk about arguably one of the most polarizing athletes that the NFL has ever seen, that perhaps American sports has ever seen. And you decided to write a book on said athlete. It's sitting right there behind you. But for those unaware, it's called Out of the Darkness: The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers. I was just saying before we came on, picked this up on Saturday, read it in about 2 days. Could not put it down. Incredible work, kind of depicting Rodgers, not only some of his most recent trials and tribulations, but then also his early life and how Rodgers was sculpted into the person that he is today. So, Ian, as a sports fan, and I'll speak for all the sports fans out there who pick up this book. Thank you for putting this together.
Oh, thank you, and thanks so much, Nick, for having me on. And I actually was scheduled to do a LeBron James biography. I was under contract for that, and lo and behold, another LeBron book was coming out, unbeknownst to me, and I was looking to pivot. And Aaron, I live in the New York, New Jersey area. Aaron got traded into my backyard, and I actually always wanted to do a Packers book at some point in my life. Uh, uh, I attended St. Cecilia High School in Englewood, New Jersey. Vince Lombardi was the head coach there, and actually was the only place where he was a head coach before the Green Bay Packers. And Lombardi lived 8 houses away from the house I grew up in, so I always had that uh, respect and admiration for Packers mystique. And so Aaron really is he's going into the Hall of Fame as a Packer, let's face it. That might feel a little different if he wins a Super Bowl in New York, but basically he'll go down as a Green Bay Packer. So once he got traded to New York, the marriage of this all-time great who only has the one ring with a franchise that has not been to the Super Bowl since January of 1969. That is a long time. I thought it was a great opportunity to write a book about an athlete, an American male athlete, probably as prominent as anyone who has not had a defining bio written about him. And that's why I took it on.
So before we get into the book and some of the topics surrounding Rodgers, I kind of want to set the stage for the audience just so they can appreciate the amount of work that went into writing this book. So can you kind of give us a feel for the amount of interviews you had to do, how long it took, all that good stuff?
Sure. After the trade, the Jets had an introductory press conference in Florham Park, New Jersey. Aaron did 100 interviews that day, or so it seemed. But afterward, at the end, the Jets PR chief, Eric Gelfand, introduced me to Aaron and said, "Hey, this is the guy who's starting a book project on you and your life." And so I talked to Aaron about it a little bit, and I said, "I realize this is coming out of left field." And he said, "Well, everything today is coming out of left field." He was starting a new life in New York, New Jersey. And I said, "Here's my process. I've done these books on Bill Belichick, Coach K at Duke, Derek Jeter, Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, and my process is pretty much the same. I try to contact as many people as humanly possible who has had a role in the subject's life, and and then I try to tell a fair and honest account of that life. And if you have any questions about my process, just let me know." And he said, "Yeah, I do have a question. Do you plan on interviewing me for this book?" And I said, "Absolutely would love to, but that is entirely up to you, of course, Aaron." And he didn't commit to a damn thing. And frankly, I handed in my manuscript, I want to say it was late January, early February, without him. I had interviewed 250 people, and he wasn't one of them. And so I assumed this was another unauthorized biography. And I've done these before where I had no cooperation from the subject, Bill Belichick foremost among them. And then 2 weeks later, I get a message from the Jets that said, "Aaron is now willing to see you." Now, I had tried through the Jets. I had tried his agent. I had gone directly to Aaron. I had sent him my Belichick and Coach K books. Nothing. I got nothing but indifference. Finally, he agreed to see me. So I flew out from New Jersey to Los Angeles. On the way there was a bomb scare on my plane, and we were diverted to Chicago for about 7 hours. That was not a fun experience. The plane was cleared, flew to LA, drove to Malibu, and I really appreciated that he was willing to see me, period, Nick, because he didn't owe me anything. I mean, this was an unauthorized book. He had no editorial control. He got no money for it. And but he sat down. I didn't know what the time constraint would be. As it turned out, I got 2 hours with him. If it was full cooperation, I would have needed 15 to 20 hours of Aaron talking about his life. But this limited cooperation did make the book better. And since he did not owe me that cooperation, I very much appreciated the fact that he granted me that time.
So before we get to his upbringing and some of the earlier days of Aaron, you bringing up that story reminds me of one of the more interesting parts in your book, which is surrounded. It kind of surrounds this idea of who Aaron is, with teammates and with others around him, and then the Aaron that might be portrayed in media as this guy who believes in conspiracy theories. It's actually funny. I just had Deshaun Kaiser on the podcast about a couple weeks ago, and we were laughing about Deshaun's first interaction with Aaron and the whole 9/11. Aaron going up to him and basically the first question being, "Hey, do you believe in 9/11?" And Deshaun was like, not sure how to respond. And so there's almost like this dichotomy between who Aaron is and then who he's portrayed at. But in the book, you get into some of some of the charity work that he does, and some of the things that he's done for those around him that don't normally get portrayed in media. So I was hoping you kind of allude to maybe that side of Aaron that most people might not be familiar with.
Yeah, people forget before COVID, Aaron was considered one of the good guys in the NFL and in American sports in general. He supported Colin Kaepernick. It was one of the few stars to say out loud that he felt that the NFL owners were keeping him out of the league because of his protest. He rebuked a fan who shouted out an anti-Muslim slur during the national anthem, and President Obama wrote him a letter thanking him for that. He was really on the right side of a lot of social issues, and media members, commentators were praising him constantly for that. And then his life changed really with those 4 words, "Yeah, I've been immunized," when he was asked if he was vaccinated in August of 2021. And so really he became a villain after he was, for most of his career, considered the opposite of that. And then the conspiracy theories and the thing with Jimmy Kimmel. And so there were layers of that. Sometimes it felt like he was leaning into that role. But there's been a lot of good with Aaron Rodgers, and I think that's been forgotten in the last 3-4 years. And I was talking to his marketing agent at CAA, Ed Berry, who's Saquon Barkley's agent. He told me he's a frustrating client because he does these acts of kindness and generosity behind the scenes, and then when Ed wants to publicize it, Aaron shuts him off. He's like, I don't want that. So, some of it is Aaron's fault because he doesn't agree to publicize some of these things, but giving money to victims of the wildfires in California, and he's great with children in particular. There was a kid last year at Jets camp. His name was Braylon Hodgson, and he had a rare form of brain cancer, brain stem cancer, and he was dying. And so his father took him to Jets camp. And his father, after consuming Aaron Rodgers' information in the media for the last few years, just assumed he was a jerk and that he might say hello and then just move on. But actually, Aaron spent more time with this kid at camp than anyone and showed him great compassion. And his father really felt like he cared. So, unfortunately, the boy dies on September 12th, the morning after Aaron got hurt on the night of 9/11. And he had Aaron Rodgers' jersey with him when he died. And so there were a lot of stories like that. And even Randall Cobb, his old teammate, would tell a story about Aaron flying across the country from California to Nashville to attend his 3-year-old birthday party. And he said, how many people do you know would do that for a 3-year-old's birthday party? So there are a lot of stories like that. I think the goodness of Aaron is still there below the surface, lost in the public discussion of who he is as a player and athlete, but it shouldn't be lost. And so I tried to bring those stories out in this book because it's not a fair appraisal of his life if those stories aren't there, because they exist, they're real, and they need to be told.
What does that say about Aaron, this reserved nature and this, this pushback against, publicizing some of the good that he's done?
It's that he doesn't need it. And I do think he cares about the criticism, and all human beings do. It hurts, and I think sometimes it hurts, but he doesn't really feel the need to balance it out with public stories anyway. And I think that's actually a commendable trait. He has certainly battled with the media over some of his positions, whether it be the Jimmy Kimmel affair or conspiracy theories or the vaccine particularly. And that's really the one that changed his life. And he's never recovered from that public relations hit. And I did sit with him when I sat with him in Malibu. And I asked him why he didn't just tell the truth that day. It was August of 21, right? So 3 years ago, you're asked if you're vaccinated. You're a fearless public speaker. You're a truth teller, at least your truth. So why not say what you believe to be true that day, which is that you were allergic to an ingredient in Pfizer and Moderna and concerned about Johnson & Johnson side effects. And I was vaxxed, but I would have found that to be a reasonable position. And I don't think I would have hammered you that day in my column if I were sitting there as a columnist for a Green Bay or Milwaukee outlet. And he effectively said, yeah, I should have said that. I made a mistake. And so guys like him, they don't admit weaknesses and faults and errors and mistakes very often. I can't remember him ever saying, I'm sorry about anything. And he didn't say he was sorry, but he just said, I gave critics ammunition that they still have against me today. And that was a mistake. I should have been truthful, and I wasn't, because he did mislead people. And when the truth came out 3 months later that he was not vaccinated, I said to him, I think you would have gotten less than half the criticism that you ended up fielding had you just been honest in August of 21. And I think ultimately he agreed with that. And so I appreciated the fact that he at least admitted that he made a mistake.
So let's go back in time and take the audience back to Aaron Rodgers' childhood. What do people need to understand about Aaron and his upbringing and who he was back then to kind of better understand who he is today?
I think the center piece of his childhood was really the church, the neighborhood church in Chico, which was part of the Christian Missionary Alliance. It's an evangelical religion. And his mother particularly was very devout. And she said everything we did as a family was a prayer project. And Aaron actually never really connected with the church. He had a religious group that met weekly called Young Life, and he liked that a lot. But he didn't like church, and ultimately he rebelled against his Christian upbringing and became non-religious. He became spiritual, but not religious. And that was part of the family estrangement, at least at the beginning, but not so much now, as it's running up on, unfortunately, on 10 years. But it really was a happy childhood with his two brothers. They were playing sports all the time. Basically, their parents, particularly their mom, was taking them from one game to the next practice, to the next game, to the next practice. And his older brother, Luke, who was a big, strong, athletic kid, they had a lot of battles, just as you would expect, an older brother and a younger brother. Then Jordan, the youngest, came along later. But it was a happy childhood. They didn't have much in the way of money. They had enough to get by. And they spent Aaron did part of his childhood in Oregon when his father went to complete his studies to be a chiropractor. And he was a great young baseball player and just overall athlete. But his dad thought he would be a Major League Baseball player when he grew up. And they moved back to Chico, California from Oregon just before Aaron went into high school. They allowed him to play football for the first time in 8th grade because of contact concerns and injury concerns. And yeah, he became a great high school football player. The problem was that Division I recruiters never went north of Sacramento, and Chico is north of Sacramento. So he was not seen. He was not recruited. And it really bothered him a lot. And here's a kid who was a great quarterback, and he had 1310 on his SATs, and he was forced to go to the local community college. And so you see the beginnings of that chip on his shoulder that grew into a boulder. Basically, he was misevaluated and underevaluated every step of his football life. But the junior college experience was a very good one. It gave him a platform to showcase his skills and for Division I coaches to see him. And obviously the coach at Cal, Jeff Tedford, saw him while looking at another player, tight end Garrett Cross, and he offered him a scholarship. And the rest is history. But I will say this: when I was sitting with Aaron in Malibu, looking around at his estate on the Pacific Ocean, it struck me that he's really a self-made first ballot Hall of Famer, really a self-made man. Nobody ever handed him anything. Probably doesn't get enough credit for that he created this Hall of Fame career through the singular force of his will and talent and work ethic. And that should also be discussed more often than it is.
So to that work ethic point, I have a quote pulled from the book here that really stood out to me. So this is when Rodgers, Rodgers would go online and go to rivals.com and look to see if there was a scouting report on him. And most of the time, actually, every single time. There was no scouting report on Aaron Rodgers. To your point, he wasn't being scouted. As someone who grew up in Sacramento, I can attest to the Chico part of the story where not too many people venture out there. But so Rodgers didn't see himself scouted, and he said, and I quote, "It doesn't matter because those guys are out there and they think they got it made. I'm going to wake up every morning before school and work out. I'm going to stay after school and work out. I'm going to throw 3 times a week with my buddies. And when those guys are enjoying the top of the list, I'm going to be out there outworking them and know at some point it's going to catch up." So to your point about being a self-made man.
Yeah, and so he doesn't get a scholarship at all out of high school. And one thing that really helped him was baseball. Actually, his senior year, his coach, who had been drafted by the Mets, and he didn't make it in the big leagues, but Ron Souza was extremely instrumental in his development, because after senior year of football, no scholarship offers, he barely got any Division 2 or 3 interest, and some JUCOs were interested in him, but he was thinking of giving up football. And his coach, his offensive coordinator, the guy he respected, he was one of the most respected coaches in the area. Souza said, "Why don't you play baseball again? You haven't played since, well, I think 8th grade, right?" And so Aaron decides to play again and go on the mound. He was a very good pitcher, and he said it. Playing baseball and pitching and having success brought back his competitive fire as an athlete. It had been doused. It had been extinguished. And that really brought him back and put him in a good frame of mind going into his football season at junior college at Butte. And yeah, and even in the draft, because he was supposed to go number 1 a week or 2 before the 2005 NFL draft out of Cal. And it was his dream to be the next great quarterback for the 49ers. That was his childhood team. He idolized Joe Montana and Steve Young. He wanted to be the next great 49ers quarterback. And of course, he plunges in the draft. He doesn't go number 1. They decide to take Alex Smith, and he falls all the way to 24. And he becomes the first reality TV show, really, at the NFL draft. That was the first day that YouTube had a video uploaded to it, and it's kind of fitting. This was the first draft reality show for the NFL, the humiliation of Aaron Rodgers as he fell to 24 while the cameras captured his every frown and look of dismay and disgust even. So he got booed by Packers fans when they announced at the atrium in Lambeau Field that he was the pick at 24. Brett Favre was not exactly neighborly to him his first couple of years in the league, so he had to overcome a lot. He really did. And had absolutely nothing handed to him, and that should be certainly a part of his narrative for sure.
I certainly want to get into the draft. As we were joking around before this, I'm a huge 49ers fan. So that moment in 2005, even though I was young, is still seems fresh in my mind, because I was certain that the Niners were going to take Rodgers. And as a 49ers fan, it's hard not to think what could have been with Rodgers and, how much success we could have had with him at quarterback instead of, Alex Smith and then Kaepernick, even though, we had some success with them. Rodgers was on a whole different level, obviously, and continues to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But before we get into the draft and some of the finer details there, I want to go back to his days at junior college and a man by the name of Craig Rigsby, who you called one of the more instrumental figures in shaping Rodgers' career trajectory. What can you tell us about Craig Rigsby?
Craig Rigsby is like a Charles Barkley-esque figure in Aaron's life. He is a storyteller. He's gregarious, bigger than life. And yeah, he talks like a used car salesman, and Aaron can't control him. And in fact, when I met Aaron for the first time at the start of this process, that little 3-minute exchange we had on his introductory day with the Jets, he did say to me, "If you talk to Craig Rigsby, just remember that he doesn't let a fact get in the way of a good story." So Rigsby saved his career. And the other coaches on staff, they had another quarterback who had been at Butte in the program for 2 or 3 years, and it was his turn to be the starter. But Rigsby saw something special in Aaron as a freshman, and he said, "No, we're not doing that. Aaron's better than this kid already, and a few weeks into the season, he's going to be much better than this kid." And Rigsby was right. And so he gives Aaron the platform he needs to showcase his talent and to prove he's always been a Division I player. He just got missed. And Cal came in and took him away. Rigsby said that And if you just think about how amazing it is that he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, that his entire high school recruiting experience really boils down to the local community college coach who lived like 5 houses away, walking to his front door, knocking on the door, entering, sitting in the living room, and trying to convince Aaron's mother, Darla, that her son, who's a great quarterback and scored 1310 on his SATs, that he needs to go to the local community college. She wanted absolutely no part of that. She said, my son is not going to community college. But that's exactly where he ended up. And it was really the best thing that ever happened to Aaron, in large part because Craig Rigsby saw something special in him, saw an opportunity to play him right away and not play the incumbent. That would be the easy thing. And frankly, I think the vast majority of coaches would have done that. Let's start the season with Brian Botts, who was in place for multiple years in the program. It's his turn to start. But no, Rigsby said, we're not doing that. We're going with the more talented kid. And Rodgers is a star. And that's really where I think his football career was saved. I think without that, I'm not sure what becomes of him. He certainly doesn't become an NFL great, an all-time great. And I have him now among my 5 or 6 best quarterbacks all time, and he's got a chance to add to that legacy with the Jets.
So after Butte Junior College, Rodgers gets recruited to Cal, like you mentioned. And one of the more defining moments in his career at Cal was that famous game against USC, where he absolutely tore USC's defense apart, only to fall short at the end. But there was a very successful coach on the other side at USC, a man by the name of Pete Carroll, who, again, as a 49ers fan, very familiar with Pete and some of his teams, obviously with the Seahawks. But Pete said after the game, and you mentioned it in your book, basically it wasn't that Cal lost. USC survived, essentially, the onslaught from Rodgers. And Carroll was quoted saying, that guy is, freaking amazing. Do you view that as the defining moment in Rodgers' Cal career?
Yeah, I do. And to lose that game against USC when he completed 23 straight passes was a tough pill to swallow. But USC was loaded, obviously, with NFL players all over that defense. And yeah, the interesting thing about Rodgers' career at Cal is that a lot of coaches and scouts thought he looked robotic in his dropbacks, and he kept the ball up near his ear. And he wasn't this loose, mobile, athletic player that he became at Green Bay. So that might have hurt him on draft night. That day against USC in the Coliseum, that's really the day, I think, where people thought this is the number 1 pick in the draft, even though Cal lost that game. And Cal should have been in the Rose Bowl that year. They hadn't gone in forever, and Texas and Mac Brown really politicked their way into the Rose Bowl that year, but Cal deserved to go. And so another time, Aaron got slighted, and he doesn't forget any real or imagined slights at all, and he used that as fuel in his career. And although San Francisco beat him a number of times in the playoffs, he said that he would make the Niners regret that choice at that number 1 to go with Alex Smith, and I think he did. And obviously now as a Hall of Famer going in on the first ballot, it's hard to make a case that Alex Smith was the right guy there at number 1. But yeah, there were concerns. And one thing that the 49er contingent looked at was that style of play, and also the history of Jeff Tedford quarterbacks was not a good one in the NFL. But the ball near the ear and the robotic look did count against Aaron. The Niners head coach at the time, Mike Nolan, told me that he was clear, and that Mike Nolan's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in sports, and yet he was perturbed that he had Mike McCarthy as his offensive coordinator for 1 year, and the Niners finished dead last in the league in offense, and McCarthy still got the Packers job. Not only that, McCarthy's one of the people who talked Mike Nolan into drafting Alex Smith. Now McCarthy benefits by getting Rodgers in Green Bay after finishing dead last in offense. Nolan gets fired eventually in San Francisco, and McCarthy wins the Super Bowl with the quarterback he didn't want in San Francisco. So Nolan was not thrilled with the way that all played out. But yeah, the one thing I'll say about McCarthy is he did realize his mistake. Obviously, once he started coaching Aaron, you could see how great he was. But he got him to lower the ball and made him a more athletic player and really turned him into a franchise player. A lot of the narrative about the McCarthy-Rodgers relationship is really negative in hindsight. But they won a Super Bowl together. You can't take that away from either man. And McCarthy did contribute a lot to his development as a franchise player.
I want to go back to the draft really quick, and I want to set the stage for the audience because there's a couple details in here that everybody talks about the Niners passing up on Rodgers, but what a lot of people forget, myself included, is that there are a number of teams behind the Niners who could have taken Rodgers, and so you outline it in your book, but essentially in the top five, there were the Niners, the Dolphins, the Browns, and the Bucks. So Niners obviously had the number one pick, Dolphins had the second pick, Browns had the third pick, and then Bucks, I believe, were five. And so those four teams in the top five all needed a quarterback, and yet they all passed on Rodgers. We, got a glimpse into a little bit of what maybe the Niners' rationale was, but what can you tell us about the three other teams who passed up on Aaron?
I would focus on really two of them, and that is Miami at number two, which Nick Saban's the coach. If Nick Saban drafts Aaron Rodgers, just think of the AFC East in the coming years after that. Belichick and Brady in the AFCs versus Saban and Rodgers. That would have been a battle royale for the ages. And it's really a shame that didn't happen because Nick Saban might still be coaching the Dolphins if that had happened. But it didn't. And I never got an answer from Saban as to why he didn't like Rodgers at number two. He took Ronnie Brown, a running back, and it's just, you can't miss on a quarterback when you have the second pick and take a running back. And I think that's been proven over time. And really, at number five, Tampa Bay. And 2 days before the draft, Aaron gets a phone call from the coach of the Buccaneers, John Gruden, who had worked him out and had Jerry Rice catching passes for Aaron. And that was a thrill to Rodgers, who obviously grew up a 49ers fan. And Gruden told Aaron on the phone, if you're there at number five, we are taking you. So Rodgers is pretty happy about that because at that point, he figured that San Francisco was going with Alex Smith, so now he has a home in the top five. But his agent, Mike Sullivan, thought, I don't want to take this to the bank, not coming from Gruden. And coaches and scouts and executives lie a lot before the draft to create trade leverage and just sending out false signals to throw off the opposition and the competition. And so Mike Sullivan, the agent, calls his friend, Bruce Allen, who's the GM of the Bucs, and he says, Bruce, I want you to do me a favor. The draft, obviously, in New York on Saturday at the Javits Center. By Friday night at midnight, I want you to call me and tell me whether or not you are taking my client. Because before the draft on Saturday, I do not want to be sitting in a room with his family telling them I don't know if he's going to get picked in the first round even. Okay, Bruce Allen says, I'll call you at midnight Friday. Sure enough, Mike Sullivan's in a bar in Manhattan. Phone rings. It's Bruce Allen, Friday at midnight. And Mike says, okay, Bruce, what's your decision? And he said, sorry, we're not taking. So now Aaron's got no home. Nobody in the first round is committed to taking him. And Mike Sullivan has to tell Aaron and his family that Saturday morning before the draft. And so they knew they were in for a rocky day that day. But that was the first NFL draft reality show, the humiliation of Aaron Rodgers. And it wasn't a fun experience.
One of the crazier facts from that draft is that there were three, you alluded to the Dolphins, but there were three running backs drafted in the first five picks. Imagine telling somebody now, imagine next year's draft, three running backs go in the top five. I mean, that would be insane. I can't wrap my head around that.
There were two from Auburn too.
Right.
I think Ronnie Brown from Auburn, and I'm looking it up now as we speak here. I think there was a second. Cadillac Williams. John Gruden took him from Auburn with the fifth pick instead of Rodgers. And then the other running back was Cedric Benson, taken fourth by the Bears from Texas. Three running backs taken in the top five. And so Nick Saban takes Ronnie Brown from Auburn instead of Aaron Rodgers. And John Gruden and Bruce Allen takes Cadillac Williams from Auburn instead of Rodgers. Two pretty big mistakes.
Pretty big is an understatement. So let's go past the draft. Rodgers is with the Packers now. And he comes in right behind Brett Favre. What can you tell us about Brett's relationship with Aaron?
Yeah, it wasn't a good one. I know Brett has said it was a great relationship, and I don't know anyone else who would echo that sentiment, including Aaron Rodgers, who told his parents and friends that Brett was not treating him well. He was icing him out of trips. If he had a hunting trip or a fishing trip, he'd invite the other backup quarterback, but not him. And he mocked him sometimes. Practical jokes that Aaron he thought they were cruel. And so Favre, if you were a backup quarterback and you were a non-threat, you were a career backup, Favre would be your best friend. He'd be your next door neighbor. But Aaron was a clear and present danger. He was a threat, and he was hired to replace Favre. And listen, I can understand it from Brett's perspective. Nobody wants to have his or her future replacement sitting beside you, right? And oh, and by the way, we want you to train this person to replace you when we think you're too old. We're going to kick you out of here. And so I understand that, but I think Favre took it a little too far. There was one incident where he took Aaron's helmet, his real helmet that he used, and treated it like it was going to be a charity helmet. And he had a lot of Packers sign it with black marker, and he had Aaron sign it with black marker. Aaron thought it was a charity helmet until he got on the practice field, and the equipment guy brings out his helmet, and it's full of all these scribblings in black ink. And for 2 hours, teammates making fun of him. And Aaron didn't think it was funny. And he goes into the locker room. He sees someone he knows. He says, "Can you believe what that bleep bleep just did to me?" And so there was a lot of stuff like that. And Aaron got sick of it. And now by the third year, I think Aaron had won Brett over a little bit. I think he had earned his respect, his work ethic, his attention to detail. And so he would try to help out Brett. If Brett missed something, he wasn't at a meeting or an instructional day with McCarthy during the offseason. So I do think it got better. And frankly, today it's much better because Aaron experienced the pain of what Brett Favre experienced in 2008. He got kicked out in favor of a younger quarterback. So I think Aaron got an appreciation of what Brett felt in 2008 when he was. I understand that he wanted to trade to New York and it was a good idea. But basically, I look at that as a firing. He knew they didn't really want him back. So he found an exit strategy, and he found one in the New York Jets.
I think from the book you mentioned how when the Packers drafted Rodgers, Favre's agent had texted, I believe, the GM and said WTF. And then when the Packers drafted Love, I believe that was Rodgers' same response.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny how it's a full circle moment.
Yeah. I asked Aaron, I heard you said 3 words in a text to a friend, and it was what the bleep. And he said, yeah, and other things too. So I got a kick out of that. But the difference was Aaron fell into Green Bay's lap at 24. They had to take him. He was by far the best player on the board. Plus, Brett was getting older, already talking about retirement for the 19th time. And when Jordan Love was available, the Packers traded up to get him. He didn't fall into their laps. It wasn't like they were forced to draft him. So Aaron was upset by that without question. And again, after it ended, it's amazing that both of them got traded to the Jets. The difference is Brett did not want any part of New York, and Aaron wanted New York. But yeah, Aaron experienced exactly what Brett felt in 2008, and that's why they have something of a bond today.
Few questions surrounding the Rodgers Love kind of situation. So first of all, how would you describe Rodgers' approach to Love in terms of a mentor? And then how much of that do you think played into Love's development?
Yeah, I think a lot. I think that Love would say and has said that Aaron was a very good mentor and a friend, really a teammate who, I think Aaron set the tone. It was after the draft, he contacted Love and said, listen, I'm not here. This is a special moment for you. You realize a dream. My feelings have absolutely nothing to do with you, and I know you have nothing to do with the position you're in now. And I think he never, just learning how not to treat a successor from Favre, that he never let that really impact negatively the way he treated this kid. And I said to Aaron when I met with him in Malibu, and I have not covered Jordan Love, but I said, from a distance, he seems like a good kid. And he said, oh, yeah, he is. And I could just tell the way he answered it. He meant it. He wasn't being phony about it. And I think I know they still text. And he texts Jordan encouragement even last year when he was out with the injury. So, yeah, he learned how not to treat your eventual replacement. And I do think that had a good amount to do with, now Jordan has the talent and he was going to be a good player in the NFL regardless. But I think that Aaron's treatment of him expedited that process at least a little bit.
What can you tell us about the relationship between Rodgers and McCarthy and that falling out, and then the relationship between Rodgers and LaFleur and kind of how that ended?
Yeah, it ended ugly with McCarthy, and in 2018, Aaron definitely wanted him out, and he got his way there. They butted heads a lot over play calling, and there was one situation, really Aaron's most devastating postseason defeat, 2014 NFC Championship game collapse at Seattle. Before that game, Aaron told McCarthy he wanted him to run 6 plays that Aaron saw Dallas run during the regular season to great success against Seattle, their defense, Tony Romo. He said, let's run these 6 plays over and over and over again. And McCarthy ran 3 of the 6 plays 1 time each. And Aaron was not happy about that. And that's just a small picture, a small look at the big picture. They butted heads a lot over play calling, strategy. Aaron was frustrated at times that McCarthy would see a game Thursday night or a college game Saturday and try to install a play late. And but in retrospect, now again, almost like with Favre, their relationship is better now because they won a Super Bowl together. Aaron didn't do that with LaFleur. So I think they have a greater appreciation for what each meant to the other. And nobody can take away the fact that they did win that Super Bowl. And Aaron said to me, we butted heads. He admitted it for the record, but he said we also lit up the league offensively a lot of years. And you can't take that away from them. I think with LaFleur, I have this in the book. It's interesting. One of their first conversations maybe was telling. And even though they lit up the league too, Matt said, Aaron, I want you to turn your brain off. And if you want to upset Aaron Rodgers, you tell him to turn his brain off. That's the way to do it. Matt didn't know that at the time. But Aaron said, Matt, I can't turn my brain off. That's the way I win games. I win them Monday through Friday with my brain on, and I need my teammates to have their brains on. So right there, you see a butting of the heads. And again, they had a lot of success. They didn't get to the Super Bowl. Their disconnect and really captured by 3rd down and 4th down and goal against Tampa Bay and Tom Brady in the NFC Championship game where Rodgers assumed they would go for it 1st and goal at the 8. Okay, it's now 3rd and goal, and they didn't gain a yard, and now he runs a play, incomplete pass. He's thinking they have 4 downs to get the touchdown, and LaFleur sends out the field goal team down 8 points late. And afterward, there was a disconnect there. It was very clear that Rodgers thought they would go for a touchdown on 4th down because they were down 8 points late in that game. And so you could see where that was going. He wanted more personnel say in the organization. That's not the Packer way. Players play, coaches coach, and decision makers decision make. And they gave him a little bit more say, but not as much as he wanted. And the writing was on the wall, particularly after the 2002 season when they missed the playoffs. Aaron's banged up, and everyone knew it was time for the divorce to happen. And he saw a great opportunity with the New York Jets, and he rightfully took it.
Ian, last two questions to round us out here. We've spent a lot of time on Rodgers, the football player, but Rodgers, more into like his personal life. There's a big part of the book that's dedicated to the falling out with his family. For those unaware, give us a 30,000-foot view of what that falling out was and where things stand today.
Yeah, that was the question I was asked more than any other. And I thought, Nick, when I started this process, that there would be one defined issue or development that caused the fracture in the family. But there really are many reasons. And it's hard to get your arms around it. And I think most family divisions are like that, very complicated. A lot of he said, she said. Everyone has his or her truth and version of the events. The parents thought Olivia Munn was largely to blame. The actress that he was dating at the time of the estrangement in 2014 when it started. But he hasn't dated Olivia in 7 years. So she certainly isn't solely to blame, if to blame at all, because Aaron really entered that relationship with thoughts about his family that revolved around, or the family unit revolved around his success and fame and fortune too much, that he was very generous with family members. It wasn't fully appreciated. They disagree with that assessment. Doesn't matter. His perception is what drove the estrangement, and that's what he felt. And Olivia really notarized his thoughts. That was her role. I had a family member tell me that in Olivia, he found a comrade who just agreed with him. That was her role in the estrangement. But he was upset with his brothers on a number of fronts. They were upset with him on a number of fronts. Jordan, his younger brother, went on The Bachelorette and talked about the estrangement in 2016. Aaron was upset about that. He perceived it that his younger brother was using it to further his TV career. I think Jordan saw it a different way, but I think I have a hopeful scene in the book, and that was last summer at Lake Tahoe. And Aaron plays in this celebrity golf tournament every summer before training camp. And his father, Ed Rodgers, who hadn't seen him or talked to him in 9 years, decided, I'm going to that tournament and I'm going to try to have an encounter with him. So Ed puts himself in the crowd, and he was hoping Aaron would see him. And lo and behold, on Saturday in the middle of his round, Aaron saw him. And he debated whether or not to ignore him, to act like he didn't see him, or to go over there. And something compelled him that day to go over to give his father a hug. So Ed Rodgers turns around, and there's Aaron standing 15 feet away looking at him. And Ed told me he froze because he forgot what that feeling felt like, to have his son in his presence looking at him. It's been 9 years. So they each hugged each other. They each said, I love you. It lasted 30 seconds. And Aaron had to go finish his golf round, and Ed cried. But they both said it was a very meaningful moment. And Aaron said in the book that he wants to reestablish a relationship with his father, who was his hero, his idol growing up. He wanted to be his dad. So I do believe the road to reconciliation will run through that relationship. I think Ed and Aaron will come together, and hopefully in the coming weeks or months. And then once that happens, we'll see about the rest of the family unit. But Ed and Aaron's reunion and reconciliation really needs to happen.
As you look at Rodgers' career in totality, there's always this what if. You have brought up Saban and the Dolphins. There's always the hypothetical of, well, if Rodgers went, was drafted by the Patriots and played with Belichick, he would have 15 Super Bowls by now, just because of, Rodgers' talent. And Brady has even admitted, listen, Rodgers is more talented at football than I am. I just have the system. I have the support of a Hall of Fame coach, arguably the best head coach of all time, an amazing offensive coordinator in Josh McDaniels. And you had a quote in the book so this is in 2012. This is a year after the Packers won the Super Bowl. And in 2012, they lose to the Giants in the playoffs. And you had a quote that said, imagine if someone had told Aaron Rodgers that he would play another 11 years in Green Bay and never step foot inside the big game again. And that quote really put into perspective the totality of Rodgers' career, not only in Green Bay, but so far with the Jets, with obviously what happened last year. From what you can tell in your perspective, what's the reasoning behind that? Do you think it's more so on Rodgers and his ability to play in the clutch? Do you think it's the support that he had, not only from the coaching staff, but also the defense that the Packers have had over the years, and then all the way up to leadership? Which one do you think plays a bigger factor?
I think it's all the above, Nick, and that may not be a great answer to your great question, but I think defense broke down on him a lot more than it broke down on Tom Brady in New England. I think special teams broke down on him at times. Obviously, if they recover an onside kick in 2014, Aaron's back in the Super Bowl and advancing in the NFC Championship game in Seattle instead of losing in a terrible collapse. So I think coaching let him down sometimes. He didn't have Bill Belichick, the greatest of all. He didn't have Josh McDaniels. He didn't have the Patriot Way system to elevate him and support him. And so, but some of it is him too. He left some points on the field at times in big postseason moments. He left some victories out there that really he could have put away in the postseason and did not. And I think that Tom Brady had a fearless quality in the postseason that Aaron had as a young player. He won 4 of his first 5 postseason games, but he seemed to have lost that in later years. Maybe the scar tissue of the bitter postseason defeats and some of the off-field controversies accumulated to an extent where he held back some and didn't want to be the reason we lost, as opposed to let me go be the reason we win and I advance. So yeah, it's really all of the above, but he still has a chance here if he can win a Super Bowl with the Jets to erase a lot of that. Really, I think that to win the big one in New York City for a franchise and it had been 55 years and haven't even gone to the Super Bowl in that time, it's going to feel like, if he does it, it's going to feel like he won 3 or 4 rings. It really will. So we'll see if he can pull it off.
I do have to say a lot of those Packers playoff losses came against my 49ers. So I was pretty happy about that.
4 of them, right? He lost 2 to Kaepernick
Yeah.
and 2 to Garoppolo. It's hard to believe he's 0-4 against the team that didn't draft him. But I think his regular season record, I have it in the book, I want to say it's 6-3 against the Niners.
Correct. Yeah,
But
6-3. That's
you
what I
don't want
remember.
that 0-4 in the playoffs.
Yeah.
That's a tough one to overcome, particularly the franchise that didn't draft you number 1 overall.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about the defense. I think a prime example of that is that Raheem Mostert game, the 220 yards, 4 touchdown explosion from an undrafted running back in the NFC Championship game. I mean, that's something that Rodgers can't control. And so that's, to kind of prove your point of, all of the above approach to why he hasn't had that much postseason success. Ian, I lied to you. One last question. I know you have to run. You have spent an incredible amount of time, as we highlighted at the beginning of this interview, following Rodgers, researching Rodgers. I would argue that you probably know Rodgers better than 99% of people, maybe outside of his immediate family, perhaps even better than his immediate family, given the recent, troubles and kind of what that situation is. If you were Aaron Rodgers, what would you wish more people knew about you?
I think the acts of kindness and generosity behind the scenes, and yet he doesn't publicize it. And his marketing agent, Ed Berry at CAA, tries to and wants to, and Aaron wants no part of it. And so he's a frustrating client if you're a marketing person. But I think, they're just, he was considered one of the good guys in sports before COVID. And I think that goodness is still there. And he's great with children. He wants to be a father. That's the next stage of his life, really, after football, is he wants to be a dad. So I expect he'll get married and have children. I know his friends always talk about how good he is with their kids, and I've actually seen it in a couple of occasions. So I think that, people who end up getting this book, they'll find that he's not just this one-dimensional character that's been portrayed in the media the last 3 or so years since his COVID remark about being immunized when he wasn't vaccinated. And he's not only about the conspiracy theories, he's not only about the Jimmy Kimmel controversy. There's just a lot more to him, and a lot of it is positive. I think the fact that he is self-made, that he created this career really through that singular force of his personality, talent, and will, and that nobody ever gave him anything. He deserves credit for that. And also that I had an longtime NFL official say that he's never met an NFL player who doesn't like him. And that official doesn't like Aaron Rodgers, but he said, I have to admit it, that his teammates really adore him. That's really throughout his 20-year career. I found that to be the case. There are a couple guys, and obviously in Jennings and Finley in Green Bay that have said things, but yeah, I think that it's important to get the full scope of the human being. That's what I tried to do with this book and my previous biographies. And also, when I do these books, I don't want to tell you what to feel about the subject when you're done reading. I want you to make the decision. So I want to give you the good, the bad, and everything in between, and then you decide, who is this human being? And that's what I tried to do here with Out of the Darkness.
Ian, I can't thank you enough for your time today. I know you have to run, so we'll let you go. I could spend hours talking to you about Rodgers and about your other biographies. But listen, if you've made it this far into this interview, please go pick up Out of the Darkness. It is everything that, it's as advertised, and it is a masterful work. And Ian, kudos to you taking on this project of trying to depict and portray someone who is as complicated as Aaron Rodgers. As we got into this interview, it was not an easy task. So many kudos to you and your efforts. And it's an amazing book. I flew through it in 2 days because I couldn't put it down. If you're a sports fan, if you're a Packers fan, if you're an Aaron Rodgers fan, or if you hate him, highly suggest you go pick it up. And so, Ian, thank you so much for your time today.
Hey, Nick, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.